Good afternoon, everybody. How's everybody doing? Long day. We're all getting through it. I know I did not have coffee today, but by a show of hands, who heard my spiel yesterday? A couple of you, okay. For those of you who did, I apologize. There is going to be some overlap with some of the services I'm going to talk about, but today's session is You Are Not Alone, the latest cybersecurity threats and resources that can help. My name is Kyle Bryans. I am a senior program specialist with the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center, otherwise known as the MSISAC. I'm going to be saying a lot of acronyms today because I work in government, and if I hit 10 in one presentation, I get a bonus at the end of the week. So if I say anything you want me to clarify any acronyms, please let me know. So today we're going to dive in a little bit about the cybersecurity threats that we are seeing across the country. I'm going to clarify this is not education sector specific, but this is a nationwide trends that we are seeing. Before I get started, I do need to put a disclaimer. There are pieces of this presentation that are TLP amber. For those of you, is everyone familiar with the traffic light protocol?
No.
This is just a dissemination on which this information can be shared. There are going to be TLP ratings down at the bottom of the slides. I have tried to redact as much as I can to make it as publicly available as possible. But if you do see a TLP amber slide, I ask you please do not take a picture of it. Please do not share it. That is my disclaimer. So what is the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center? Well, we were started back in 2002 as a division of the state of New York. We are headquartered in the smallest town you never heard of, East Greenbush, New York, just across the river from Albany. And we started working with our states to help bolster their cybersecurity posture. Started off with just a few states in the Northeast, as well as Florida and Texas for some reason. I still don't know the answer to that one. And we started sharing cyber threat information because there really wasn't a place to do so. It didn't take long until the Department of Homeland Security took notice of what we were doing and then started to fund us to take this initiative nationwide. We started working with all 50 states. We realized that wasn't enough. We started working with all the counties. That wasn't enough. Now we start working with every public but non-federal entity, which does include K-12 school districts, higher education, anyone public but non-federal can be a member of the MSISAC. A little bit about how we got to where we are, and you can also see we are also a division of the Center for Internet Security. If anyone's familiar with the CIS controls, the CIS benchmarks, we are a partnership with them. We partnered with them back in 2010, and then in 2011, that's when we were designated by DHS as a key cybersecurity resource for prevention, protection, response, and recovery. 2018, in the middle of a snowstorm, we took our initiative and started working with our nation's election sector as well and formed the elections infrastructure ISAC. So we're very busy gearing up for the next presidential election, and it moves us into today. A little bit about who we work with. Like I said, we work with all 50 states. We have great partnerships, especially here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We have a great partnership at the state level at the CISO's office. We work with 9,000 local governments under that local government banner that does include your K-12 school districts, public universities, your local dog catcher if they have their own IT infrastructure. We work with them. We also work with 6 territorial governments. We do include DC as a territory. If anyone can name all 6 territories, I would be very shocked because there's some people who cannot name all 6 territories in some of my sessions. 100 tribal governments, that's a growing sector for us, working with our nation's tribes, and all 80 DHS recognized fusion centers. Is everyone familiar with what fusion center is, or worked with fusion centers in the past? That is a location where all levels of law enforcement, from your locals all the way up to your federal law enforcement, can get together and share information. Some states have multiple, like California has 7 fusion centers, and other states may have 1 or 2. In the state of Pennsylvania, we have 419 members within the state. 232 of them are in the K-12 space. By far the largest K-12 base of any state in the nation. We work with 19 of your intermediate units, and we have over 1,700 K-12 school districts nationwide and growing. That is our, by far, fastest growing sector. We work with more K-12s than coming up on small towns. So let's have a little bit of fun. Why are we here? Why are we talking about this? Why is this important? How many of you know somebody who will click on every single link that you send them? That's most of you. We care because these threats are out there, and these are kind of preaching to the choir, but some of the great examples that we see of spear phishing. This is something that one of your end users may find. It will show somebody who you're working for, an expected business need, but then there's always some very subtle details that some folks just are unable to locate, like an agency director using a yahoo.com domain, not something you see very often, and using devillas.com to send a very sensitive document. On the bottom example, I have the great benefit, I work with all of our partners across the East Coast, and I get to travel and meet a lot of people. I apologize if I forget your name or forget your face once or twice. I apologize, I am very terrible at it. So this one hits home for me. Hey, this is Rebecca. This is my new contact info. I found a picture from from our last gathering last time, and I've uploaded here to my website at photogallery.com. Check it out. How many of you know somebody who would be embarrassed and still click on the photo and try to save face? I know quite a few people who would. These are your common attacks of spear phishing. And some of the threats we see aren't coming from spear phishing. Sometimes it's just a perfectly helpful employee who's just trying to do their jobs. These are some fun examples of just some employee mistakes. You can't really see it, but the top picture right there, that is taken from a local supermarket in upstate New York. There's a white piece of tape there, and right there, written on there, is the admin username and password. Just right out there, never want to see. Now, there could be somebody has some bad knees and they don't want to climb up on a ladder and to fix their internet, but really something that someone should be doing. Bottom photo, that was taken at Baltimore Airport, and that's a pretty nice laptop. It was taken by our director of intelligence who was waiting for her flight. And this person got up probably about 3 or 4 times in the span of the couple hours that they were waiting, probably to go get some margaritas to take the edge off of a long flight. But that computer never locked. All it did was dim. How easy is that for somebody to slap a USB drive, pull some files, or just take off with a pretty nice laptop? No one would be the wiser. It'd be very easy. These are some employee mistakes that we see all the time. Who remembers this photo? A couple of head nods. This was a photo of Prince William while he was spending his time in the Royal Air Force. This, in a past life, I was a photographer, and this is a photo that gets you a lot of money. High profile figure, camaraderie, service, great. But if you look over his head, that is the login credentials for a radar detection system for the Royal Air Force. So no one's immune, not even royalty is immune to these kind of mistakes. It didn't take long for someone to take notice of this. This was the most retweeted photo on Twitter at the time. And they said, hey, you might want to take this down. But here it is years later, and we're still talking. So we get into some of the threats. The big boogeyman of cybersecurity is ransomware. We all talk about it. This is a very common theme that you probably heard a lot today and will hear going forward. What I want to say is that ransomware is a threat. It is something that we need to stay vigilant on. We need to have protections in place to avoid ransomware. But what I'm going to show you is it may not be the biggest threat that is out there in the public sector. And I'll show you some data to prove that. First off, let's just have a definition of ransomware. Kind of preaching to the choir again here, but you have your couple of different types. You have your opportunistic and your strategic. The opportunistic is your spray and pray. This is just sending it out to see whoever will click on it, and then we'll try to get a ransom later. You have your strategic ransomware. That is where there's highly targeted social engineering, spear phishing attempts at high-level CEOs, high-level players in your agencies or in your districts, trying to get the biggest payout. Most of what we see is well over $10,000. And of course, we have our 3 types: our lockers, our cryptos, and our wipers. Lockers we're not really seeing as much anymore because they're not encrypting anything, they're not really doing much. Cryptos, those are your most common, where they're actually asking for that decryption key. And wipers, which are the most nasty. Luckily, we don't see too many of those in our sector now, but of course, if you do come across one and they start deleting files, there is no recovery. At the MSI SAC, we have a very large network of intrusion detection systems placed on every state in the country. We have hundreds across multiple different sectors and towns and cities of all sizes. So this gives us a great bird's eye view of what's going on in public space. What you'll see here is our latest data from our top 10 attacking malware. What you'll see there in the dark green, those are banking Trojans. In the light green, you will see info stealers, and in the black, you have ransomware. If you take a look at that, there's not a lot of ransomware that we've seen crack the top few. And I'll tell you why this is important in a minute. You'll see at the top, you have our banking Trojans. Zeus and TrickBot have been running the table for the past year. So let's talk a little about banking Trojans. This is your common threat vector of TrickBot. It has fallen off the list, but as we've seen, it may come back. This is where you go to your bank, and they're going to ask you to enter some information. I'm trying to see if you go to PNC Bank for a little bank flavor. And they will spoof, boom, they got your information, and about, I don't know, day, week later, they might just send your money overseas. Take a look at here. This is where we're seeing Zeus. This is more of an old school technique. This is where they're asking for a little bit extra information that you wouldn't normally place, like a password or a PIN number rather, for your banking information. So same level, it will actually try to send your banking overseas. So why this is important? The MSI SAC, we have about 9,000 members nationwide, and this is the number of alerts that we send out based off of malware. You can see the yellow bar, that's all the threats that we send in that top 10 list, and the blue bar is outside that top 10 list. Commonly, about half of all the malware notifications we send out are in that list. So that makes that list very important for kind of your hit list on how to protect yourselves. We do have some anomalies. You see there in July where we had a very weird month where it was closer to about 30% on our top 10 list. But commonly we stay in the 40 to 60%. And how do they get in? As you can see, mostly through mouse spam. And this stays pretty consistent across the board. We do have some other information on the non-malware threats that we see. Mostly we're seeing DNS crypts, we are seeing MageCart, especially with MageCart, that is a credit card skimming vector that you can actually, we see that a lot during the holiday season, so we'll probably see that fall off. About 28% is going through MageCart and other exploitations in Citrix and Cold Fusion. So that also gives you a little bit more fuel to the fire to have a very rigorous patching schedule to avoid those. And of course, our favorite friend, phishing. And this is a list from 2017, 2018, and 2019 showing you the amounts of threats and the changing landscape of threats that we see over the last few years. You take a look back at 2017, the malwares highlighted in yellow, those are vectors that we saw across all 12 months. So very few, it was a very diverse landscape that we saw. 2018, things stayed pretty much the same. We saw the same players throughout the year. And then back in 2019, we were starting to creep back into the 2017 market. We're starting to see more diverse threats. So that's what we're doing at the MSI SAC. We're trying to stay on top of those threats and give you this information. All of this information is available to our MSI SAC members. We do have monthly calls, which this month's going on right now, unfortunately. And we also compile all of this information in our situational awareness report, which I'll go over a little bit later. So this is information you can take back to your districts and have yourselves a hit list on where you need to protect yourselves. But of course, threats are not only in malware, but we see a lot of business email compromise. How many people are looking out for W-2 scams around this time of year? Probably most of us. A lot of what we see are direct deposit change requests. That's probably most common that we've been seeing that in vendor payment requests, where they'll go online, find your direct deposit change form, send it to you, and then 1 or 2 pay periods later, they may have made out with a couple thousand, or in case of a vendor, it might be $10,000. Very easy way for threat actors to make some money. And I do like to highlight gift card requests because we're in a conference. This is a great story of a school district that came to us and kind of just shared a funny story. Supposedly, their superintendent was away at one of these conferences and said, "Oh man, we have a booth. We want to do a giveaway. We don't know what to do. Can you go to the drugstore and just get us some Amazon gift cards, scrape off the back, give us the numbers, and we'll just hand it to them as a piece of paper?" They're getting a little more innovative. No longer will the IRS take iTunes gift cards and payment. A lot of them are now going off of these and saying, "Hey, I'm here, I want to do a giveaway, I want to have something to give folks who are here and listening to me," and they'll get away with a couple $100. Something else you gotta watch out for is, where are you hosting your data? How many of you use third-party partners to host data of any kind? A couple of you. This is the number of account breaches. This is a slightly older slide, but you see the bubbles, the big ones that we all remember. Twitter, MyFitnessPal breaches, 330 million accounts. So you need to be vigilant where you're holding your data. You need to make sure that you stay on top of them to make sure that they are being secure. Because in the cases like that, if you hold your data and there is a breach, who are they going to go after? They're going to go after the districts, not the party you're holding your data with. So what can you do? What can you do to keep yourselves protected against these threats? First thing is patch. Patch, patch, patch. It's everyone's favorite thing in the world to do. Thank you for the laughter. Patch. Have a very rigorous patching schedule. We do have resources to help you with some vulnerabilities. They are available. Using your defensive software, training your end users. That's something I've heard a lot over the last couple of days that I've been here, is that training your end users is a very difficult process. Getting folks to not click the link. There are other resources available. There are things that you can do to help keep it on their minds as well, because cybersecurity is a shared responsibility. Two-factor authentication, strong passwords, and backups. I mentioned this yesterday with the 3-2-1 rule of backups. Make sure you have 3 copies of any important file, have it on 2 different formats, and please, please, please have one off-site. Please make sure they're tested, because last time you need to know that you don't have a backups when you need one. Creating a culture where it's okay to ask. With all of those business email compromises that we're seeing, how many of them would have been avoided if someone just picked up the phone and said, "Hey, did you really need to do this? Is this something you really want?" Just about all. And of course, my cheap plug, working with the MSI SAC. Everything I'm going to be talking about from here on out is going to be MSI SAC resources. There's going to be some overlap for those who've heard it, but here's for those who do not have access to the resources just yet. All you have to do is go onto that website, MSI SAC registration, learn.csecurity.org, and sign up. It is a 2-minute form. And then the terms and conditions are just based on sharing, like the TLP rating that we talked about earlier. They do not share information outside that TLP rating, and on our end, we will not share information unless explicitly allowed to do so. It takes 2 minutes, gets sent to someone like me or someone in the office who will process your account. You'll have access to everything that you have to offer here, including our security operations center. This is operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Doesn't matter if it's 2 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Doesn't matter if it's New Year's Eve or just a random Tuesday. Someone is here to take your call. So if you tune me out for the rest of the presentation, remember this number, 1-866-787-4722 or soc@cisecurity.org. Here is where our analysts are producing all of the tools that are at your disposal. They are creating their advisories, and they are tracking the latest threats and trends in the SLTT space. Something I want you guys to all pick up on your way out, if you would. One of these. How many of you hate the game Monopoly? absolutely hate it. You know that game that you played 1 year Thanksgiving, now you don't talk to your cousins after 6 years because they landed on boardwalk? This one. This is your get out of jail free card. On here is all the information that you can have to contact us in the event of an incident. We have folks just tape this right to their computer monitors. So if there's an incident, they go boom. All right, cool. Call the MSI stack. Doesn't matter how small. Doesn't matter if you think you just want a second set of eyes on something. Call us. We'll be able to help you out. In the SOC, there are multiple different levels of folks that we're dealing with, our analysts, those are the ones producing those advisories that we'll send out and cyber alerts in conjunction with our intelligence team. We have our computer emergency response team, which will be helping you out in the event of an incident. Our vulnerability management program, or VMP, I don't know how many acronyms I'm up to, but I'm probably not going to hit that bonus this month. And our engineering team, which handles our outage deployments. How we get our information. Incident response. We work with 9,000 members across the country. If you are seeing something in your district, we've probably seen it before, and we can help you. Most of our incident response is done over the phone. We'll be able to give you some sort of primers to get you started. I have a couple up here from our latest ones. And we'll be able to perform a log analysis and help get you guys back up and running. We do work with a bunch of partners down in Washington, D.C., down at the NKIC, or is now known as the SIOC. This is a national watch floor where big players in the industry, as well as all of the ISACs, come together to share information. We do work with some folks in the private sector, as well as our 24/7 monitoring. Now, this is where all that data on the threat vectors that we've been seeing come from. This is an intrusion detection system that is fully managed and monitored by our SOC, and this provides them with real-time support. Signature based, if a signature fires, it gets sent to someone at our SOC. We verify it to make sure it's not a false positive, and then we can hit the ground running with some incident response. The reason why I put this slide up here is you don't need an Albert to leverage the data from. You guys get all of the intelligence information, and a lot of the products that we will send you come from this out monitoring device. Gives us a great look at what's going on in the public sector. So people come up and ask me and say, what's the first thing I should do when I join the MSI stack? What's the first thing that's available? Say, send us in your publicly facing IPs and domains. Why? Because you'll get a bunch of different resources. Everybody remember those old Ronco rotisserie chickens that we used to sell at 3 in the morning? You just set it and forget it. That's what I like to call this service. You send in those IPs and domains to us, there's nothing else you need to do. You're going to get all these services and the reporting right off the rip. On the IP side, we're looking to see if you're trying to beacon out to any known malicious sites. We have a great partnership with Spamhaus, if anyone's familiar with Spamhaus. So anything that pops up on their network, we get an alert and we can send it directly to you. We also have our indicators of compromise, our top attacking IPs and domains from the outward monitoring program, and it pops up on that list. We send it directly to you once you know there's something going on. On the domain side, watching out for credential dumps. How many of you use a .edu domain? Any of you? A couple of you. Okay. On the .edu side, we're already looking out for your domains. That's just something we do on a revolving basis. If we see them pop up, we're going to send you that information. We have a great partnership with Pastebin. So anything that pops up on Pastebin, we're able to send you that information directly to you. If you are not a member of the MSI SEC and have a .edu domain, you're lucky that you're in Pennsylvania and that the state is very supportive of us and they will get that information to you. But in these cases, time's of the essence, we want you to get that information as quickly as possible. But by having those on file with us, we can get you that information. Very easy to do so. You just send a quick email to either myself or send it to our SOC, and we'll get you on the list. And now sounding like a bad used car salesman, but wait, there's more. You get a couple of different reports. This is one of the repeats for those who heard it. Yesterday would be our web profile. This is a scripted GET request of your public facing site, just if I went to just visit your web page. We're looking to see what kind of software you're running. We want to make sure things are up to date. We're going to send you a monthly report. If everything's good to go, boom, thumbs up. How many of you outsource some of the patching of your software systems? That'd be perfect, so this this doesn't apply. But for some folks who do, this is great to manage your SLAs, to make sure patching is getting done in a proper manner. Get this once a month, nothing further you have to do. And of course, now we have our report profile. This is done on a quarterly basis. This is where one of our analysts will try to connect to up to, I think it's 12 now, of the most commonly open ports on your network. What we're going to do is we're going to flag anything we see, and we're going to send it back to you and say, all right, here's what we found. You may do as you please. Things that we find commonly are printers. You'd be very surprised this actual program started because we found a very large system in the power industry on free and open internet. So we said we need to take this nationwide to let people know what their digital footprint is. Printers, very common in the education sector. You might think that's very harmless, but one of our members actually had a incident where a threat actor took over their printer and printed out reams of anti-Semitic material. Not something you want to see on the 6 o'clock news. We'll be able to let you know what's out there, what they can connect to, because we can connect to it, so can the threat actors. We do provide you with our source IP address, let you know it's us, and then we're just creating this report for you. CIS Secure Suite. All right, how many of you are familiar with the CIS controls? How many of you are familiar with the CIS benchmarks? All right, so this is a tool that we have developed. This is a service that used to be a paid service. It used to cost a couple $1,000s a year to leverage. CIS, they have now offered it to all of our public sector MSISAC members at no cost. So you have CIS Secure Suite, gives you access to Workbench, which is where our controls live, and our benchmarks. These are publicly available. Anyone can go online and download our controls or subcontrols. There are thousands of pages of controls, subcontrols, and our benchmarks. Just download them, you can use them at your will. But how many of you have interns to be able to implement all of these things that you want to do? Bet you don't. What we have created is SysCap Pro, or the configuration assessment tool. This is where you can take your endpoints and you can do a scan to see how much in compliance you are with our benchmarks, and you can deploy changes. You can start building up that golden image. You can start building up your own hardened images in your own sector or in your own environment, and you can actually deploy those out. What you can also do with our benchmarks is, let's say you have a higher up who does not want to have a long password. You want to change that up to have it fit more to your environment. You can change our benchmarks, and we can have it fit directly to you. That tool is available. That tool is no cost. Usually when folks sign up, we give folks about 30 days to get themselves acclimated with all the emails that we'll send you and all the information. And then we get you involved with CIS Secure Suite, all available. If you're already members and you have not taken advantage of CIS Secure Suite, let me know. I will get you in the right hands to get you started. Something I like to give a disclaimer to folks who have been members and who are not currently members is how we disseminate our information. We have different levels of access that we try to give to folks, because we know that people want this information. We want to make sure they're getting the right information. We have a 1 to 4 scale, going from public information to ISAC publications like our SAR, like our cyber alerts, to organizational specific notifications, which would be those reports after you send us in those IPs and domains, all the way up to an account on the Homeland Security Information Network. What is the Homeland Security Information Network? HISN is where we store our more sensitive material that we can't post on our public site. It's an identity verified portal run through DHS. We have our own community of interest. All of our members can have access to there. That's where you'll see things like our cyber alert map. If you're interested in seeing what's going on in other states, the leaderships, as they need, will go and update this map to see their alert level. From red all the way up to blue, you'll see mostly some yellow, blues, and greens in there. And you can click on a state, and they'll give you the justification of why they chose that level. It's great for situational awareness, because something happening in Texas can be happening in Pennsylvania tomorrow. Tabletop exercises. I am one of the co-chairs of our Business Resiliency and Continuity Working Group, and and we produce 15-minute tabletop exercises every single month you can take advantage of. We post them all there, you can download them and bring them into your organization, and you can actually have those in your Monday morning meetings. We do have some education-specific ones, so if you're looking for those, you can reach out to me, and I'm happy to track them down for you. And some other things you'll have there, some access to discussion boards, other guides and templates we've created, as well as some policy templates. So if you're looking to create anything like that, don't reinvent the wheel. Give us a call, we'll see what we have for you. So back to Albert again with those great materials that Albert produces. This is the weekly IPs and domains list, otherwise known as what I like to call the MSI Sachs Most Wanted. We take the worst offenders in a given week, and we send this to you every Monday morning as a CSV file. You can use that to update your blocking lists, and we do whitelist anything that has cleaned up their act. Again, with those interns, you probably don't have a bunch of interns who are managing your firewalls, creating firewall rules for you. We have tried to help you out with that. We've partnered with Anomaly. All of our members get free accounts on Anomaly to share our indicators of compromise, and you can have them pipe right to your perimeter devices. We do have some scripts available for some commonly used firewalls. If you do have the ones that you're looking for, I'll probably track them down for you to make it a very seamless process. All you have to do is reach out to our indicator sharing team. We'll get you signed up quick and easy. Our intelligence papers. Big one I want to highlight is our situational awareness report. Talked about it a little earlier. That is where you'll be able to get all that information I talked about earlier about the threats that we're seeing over the course of the month. You'll get that all in our SAR. It gets sent directly to you, but we also post it on HISM for anyone who wants to go back and take a look. Great for situational awareness. Great if you can't make it on the monthly calls. The monthly calls are great because we have some of your peers come on and share their stories and share their best practices. We do also have other primers, tools that I do have up here that you can take advantage of. Advisories. Everyone loves patching. We produce advisories that we write in-house. These are only for systems that are commonly used in the government space. So we'll send you advisories in Microsoft, Google, Joomla. We'll send you direct, and then we'll have the patches that are available. You can take a look at those, see if you're running those particular softwares, and make sure you're staying up to date. If there is no patch available, we will not leave you high and dry. We'll provide you with any workarounds we have found, and then we will provide you with a patch as soon as one becomes available. And this is a service I like to highlight as many times as I can for folks who have not heard about it. This is FedVT, or the Federal Virtual Training Environment. This platform is run by DHS. We help with some of the vetting process, which is why I like talking about it so much. So if you're an MSI member, you're pretty much on the fast track to get yourselves on board. This has about 800 hours of on-demand free training. This is available to anyone who is in the public sector or a veteran of our armed forces. All you got to do is go to fedvt.usalearning.gov and sign up. There's a bunch of courses on there. They're updating it all the time. If you're looking for a certification, you're looking for a little bit of extra training, take a look at FedVT first. Because we all know how much those certification exams can cost, and you can save a little bit of money and help your teams out. See, I don't like to end my presentations. I talk all about free stuff today. These are all stuff that are no cost to you as a public entity. We do have some services that you can take advantage of at a cost. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, so we're only doing this on a cost recovery basis. We want to keep the lights on and heat on in the winter because it gets kind of cold in New York too. If you want to take advantage of Albert, we have that available, as well as some vulnerability assessments, penetration tests, and phishing engagements. However, something I don't have in this presentation that some of you may have heard about in the previous one, if you're looking for penetration tests and phishing engagements, I would look towards NCATS with DHS. That is a federal program that provides public entities with vulnerability assessments, penetration tests, and a phishing engagement at no cost. So NCATS with DHS, take a look at them, get yourselves on the list. There is quite a bit of a wait because they are prioritizing elections. Get on the list. They will get back to you eventually. So, who are you going to call? For those of you who do not have an incident response plan, we need to build one up. First off, you can call us. We do have templates for that. Or you can add us. There's the number directly to our Security Operations Center, 1-866-787-4722. If you have a question, you're experiencing an incident, reach out to us. There is no cost. We do provide incident response. We do provide digital forensics. It doesn't matter if you use it once or if you use it 100 times. Please don't use it 100 times because then we'll have a different conversation. That is our corporate headquarters in East Greenbush. If you're ever in the area, I do like to highlight that, especially for folks that are local to us. We'd be happy to have you over to have a tour of our SOC, meet some of the folks that are in there working hard, and my information. I do not work 24 hours a day. Please don't contact me at 2 in the morning. I will be asleep, but I'll get back to you the next morning. I will now open the floor. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
NCATS, how do you spell that?
NCATS. NCATS, search NCATS DHS. They'll bring you the whole page for that. You'll have some sample documents that you'll be able to leverage and send to your leaderships if you want to get involved with that. And then you'll get in touch with your local cybersecurity advisor. Good news and bad news about that. The good news is they're adding new CSAs all the time, especially in the Northeast. Bad news is it takes a little time to get them trained up, but they'll get back to you very quickly. Yes, sir.
Maybe the answer to this is I just need to focus on one, but I saw you in Harrisburg a month or two ago, whatever, and
I'm sorry about that.
signed up, got my IPs in, I'm getting emails and things like that. I'm kind of feeling like, I don't know, stuff comes in and it's kind of hard for me to, maybe I just need to focus some time on it, but any recommendations on how to get started? I mean, I've done those things, now it feels like, I get the stuff and I don't want to do anything with it, and that's kind of where I'm at with it. So I'd like to get more involved in it.
I try to give folks a prioritized list because we do send a lot of stuff, as you know.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the things that we'll send to you, first thing I try to prioritize is those organization-specific ones, those reports that you're getting on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis. That should be number one because that's specific to you. That's stuff that is only going to be for you. You're the only one who gets to see those. Number two for me would be Secure Suite. That would be the next best thing because that'll actually help build up your posture going forward. So you'll be able to start leveraging the benchmarks. And then number three would be the advisories. So that would be a 1, 2, 3 plan on my end. Is there anything specific that you're looking at that you not have no use for?
Not really the Secure Suite. Is that going to be a piece of software that I download and run on a machine kind of thing, or maybe I'm missing something?
Yep, it's all in our it's all in our workbench. So you download. We have version 6 and 7 available. 7's our newest one. The only thing we're working on is the GUI for 7. So it's only command line right now. But if you want to do version 6, you download that, run a scan of your endpoint, and it'll see where you are with the benchmarks.
So it's like a combo fix or
Yeah.
one of those kind of things.
We do also.
Is that a better little piece for me to give to my technicians? Because instead of using, I forget what they use now, they go download one of the typical. So,
Oh yeah, there's a lot of benchmarks out there.
but what you're saying that this is probably a better tool for that. Like a machine you think might have some malware or some spyware, so you download this tool instead of one of those commercial free ones. I'll go for the stuff.
Whatever works for you. I will talk about CI. I will hype up CI Secure Suite. I think it's a great tool. It is a little bit robust, so it can be a little tough to get started. The teams do have demos that they do offer. I can actually send you a recording of the latest demo if you want to take a look at that. They go over how to get started, how to start leveraging some of the tools there, and that might help you out.
Mostly I'm just like, if that's a better tool than maybe what some of the guys are using, then I'll make sure we get full
Yeah.
update it more often or one of those things.
Another tool that I did mention today that I mentioned in the previous one would be the malicious code analysis platform. I don't know if you taken advantage of that as well. That is great for folks if you're looking for somewhere to analyze any of the malware that's coming in. If you have any suspicious emails or any URLs that you're just kind of iffy about, take advantage of that too and get that in the hands of all of your technicians. There's no limit on accounts for there. so that they can start analyzing things as they come in. So that's another tool that you can take advantage of. That's only open to MSISAC members. There's a lot of threat actors like to use some of the free services out there to try to change their codes that people are implementing. But then you have a direct line of communication to our SOC if you want a little extra set of eyes on it, a little extra peace of mind. Any other questions? Okay. Well, please feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'd be happy to help you guys out. If you have any questions, I'll be hanging out for a little while longer. If not, enjoy the rest of your day, enjoy the rest of the conference. Yes,
I just was like,
I said I noticed because I saw that. I'm like, oh, that would be there.
because that's what that read. So, okay, just check. Thank you.
Great presentation. I'm with the P-TAC, part of it. Yeah, we've actually had a couple of conference calls and organizations.
That's awesome.
Glad to see you here. It's great info.
Yeah, try that. Especially with the IUs. A lot of things we work on now. Getting this out to the district level as well. It's been a little more challenge for us trying to. I've been told I should change my residency in Pennsylvania because I want to move from engagements within Pennsylvania in the next couple months.
Goodness, well, you'd be on the road too.
Two in the same day, actually. One I'm doing a very similar threat briefing. Some network managers. I have to do that from my car and then jump into State College.
Oh, we're just
Another larger.
sounds like
It's gonna be fun. I go for service.
sure. No, we always tell people to come your direction when we're talking about resources that they can go, especially in Blue Falls High School.
Not enough money, not enough people, not
There's
enough.
one guy with a gym teacher and also the IT.
Especially in the rural districts. I was calling that because they have maybe a part-time person. It's not.
We've done a couple of notifications for breaches that we found that were in rural high schools where there's a young teacher who does double duty. They're in the middle of a system migration, anonymous FTP.
Right, they don't care. They say, okay.
No, and there's already, ISUs on the box. And we're like, guys, call these people, please.
We're gonna we will help as much as we can.
This is awesome. Good stuff. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming.
You done now for the week?
I am done for the
Relax a little bit?
I get to fly home now and be back in the office bright and early tomorrow morning.
Oh, flying. Oh, God.
At least it wasn't like my flight getting here when they flew me for Orlando.
Oh my God, to get here?
Yep,
You're in
Albany
New York, right?
Albany to Orlando, Orlando to Pittsburgh.
Wow.
Fun stuff.
Were you in New York?
Yep. Yep.
So, yeah, would have been faster to just drive.
Yep. And you know what I thought about that while I was sitting getting teased by the nice weather in Orlando?
Well, yeah, you get to see it for about an hour while you're waiting.
Look, that's what the sun looks like.
Yeah,
And
about that. Nope, psych. That was me. I came off a plane from Tokyo a couple of days ago, and I'm still like waking up at, I'm bright awake at 1 o'clock in the morning, and
how long were you Tokyo?
just like a week, just long enough to
Just long enough to
get on their time. And it's not that going there; it's the coming back that sucks.
Some of the I normally work with folks just on the East Coast.
Yeah.
But probably about 2 or 3 times a year I gotta go up to the West Coast.
That's 3 4 hours behind. 3 hours behind.
what I'm very lucky about is I go there and I do it in a day, which is grueling travel. But I don't. I last time I was out there it was in Anaheim.
Did you catch your red eye back?
I woke up at 6 a.m. flight out of LAX. I said, oh man, I have LA traffic. I'm like, oh wait, it's a 6 a.m. flight. That's like 9 o'clock. I'll be able to wake up at 5 o'clock, no problem.
Yeah. Awesome. Oh, it's terrible. Yeah, I gotta. As soon as I'm in here next, and I gotta drive home to Maryland. I'm right outside of Mead, so it's 4.5 hours. Were you prior service?
I'm sorry?
Were you prior service?
No,
No.
I was not.
I would have pegged you for an army guy.
I do get that from time to time.
You've got an army sort of demeanor. And you use words like field of fire, so I assume you were an artillery man. Oh, you're good. Plenty of time. Plus, it's the last one. I'll be lucky if there's anybody in the spring.
Yeah,
4:45 to 5:45 is a rough time slot.
my first session was yesterday at 10. Okay, great, you know. And I'm like, people are burnt out from day 2. I'm like, all right, 12, 13, I'll take it.
Yep. Yeah. It's toward the end of the day. Folks get burnt out.
Well, and how many people do you think are going to stick around for tomorrow?
Oh yeah, no,
Tomorrow's only half day. I do on a larger scale. Maryland Association of Counties.
Oh yeah.
And that's
Maryland's a mess in the education space. The bad thing about Maryland is it's not all one thing. Like they go from really, really good to really, really bad, and there's like nothing in between.
And I'll tell you, Maryland would be not really as nice as actually for 12 years in Maryland.
Really?
Not really.
I would have thought they'd have been all over that.
No, I think maybe about 20 districts. More or less, it's the town and cities, which
Yeah.
we just completed our nationwide cybersecurity review, which is our self-assessment across the country for all of our members to go off the NIST framework to see where your posture is. 1 to 7. This was the first year we had all 50 states to complete the assessment that we started doing in 2014. Maryland was the last one to get it done. They got it done just on the wire.
Yeah.
I talked about that tool yesterday because it's a great thing for districts to be able to bring to their leadership.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's a 1 to 7 scale. It goes, okay, we're racking 2 across the board. And then it also shows where you are in relation to the average of the district of your size.
Oh, well, that's cool.
So you can say, all right, we had about 3,000 members in the assessment this year, which was about 5x. So we have so much more data to kind of bolster up claims of like, this is what the fortress is in our space. So we have
Awesome.
districts who take this and say, okay, we're all the way down here, the average is here, I need X data just to start building year to year. We take that assessment, we populate your scores and say, all right, here's where you were last year, you bumped up a little bit. Usually it's about a 6 to 7%.
Do you guys do a lot of work in the EDU space?
I personally do. I work a lot with higher eds and K-12s.
Is there a lot of overlap with you guys in the Ren ISAC?
With the higher ed, yes.
Okay.
So the few higher eds that we get, I always recommend the Ren ISAC to them because it's great service.
Oh yeah, no, so they were IU, right? Indiana.
Yeah, it's a great service. We partner with them. We share information with the Ren ISAC. But it's unfortunately the Ren ISAC does it as a paid component. So some can, if you want an extra component that is no cost, we can provide that for you as well. But we always recommend the Ren ISAC to all the higher eds.
Yeah, they're decent. We've had a couple of districts come to us after getting calls from Ren ISAC. Like, they'll stumble upon student data or something at a vendor in a breach or something that they found.
And especially because it's sector specific, with the education. We're nationwide with everybody, so we can't get to the nitty gritty all the time. For the last 2 years, I've worked with a lot of kids as well, especially with the IUs in Pennsylvania. Working on with COSIN.
Oh yeah.
We just signed a partnership with them.
Oh, cool.
So we're working on a lot of work across the nation because as we've grown. So when I started, we had about 3,000 SISAC members. Now we're over 9,000. We're going to hit 10,000
mean, and that's great, because they need it.
By far. What's your session on after this?
It's third-party absence services and the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act.
Doesn't that sound exciting for a teacher?
I know, right?
Or-
40-year-old privacy law at the last time slot of the day.
My niece started in here with you, so now my niece can get it.
Well, I'll try to make it entertaining. No guarantees. It's FERPA after all, but yeah.
It was great talking to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
You need
Maybe we'll
anything?
bump into each other down the road.
Oh, yeah. I'm on my tour. I'll be down in this area quite a bit.
All right. Well, yeah, and we've got regionals all over the East Coast. That DC coming up.
Yep.
Stats DC. I don't know if you're there.
No.
It's mostly education data folks, which have their own challenges. But yeah, we hold conferences up and down the East Coast and do a lot of site visits.
Do you have my card?
I don't think so. I ran out earlier, but I can write you my number if you've got one piece of paper or something. And our schedules on our website as well, studentprivacy.ed.gov. Here's my card. Perfect. Excellent. Oh, it's double-sided. Fooled me. Oh, is it lit up?
Well, click the top. That's right. And when I have booths at some of these shows, it's the only good thing that we can give to people that get us to talk to us for 5 minutes.
I'll give you my address and my address that actually forwards to me. Sure. Actually, that will forward to me. And so if you get an odd response from Red Queen at rabbithole.org is where it would probably come back from, because I'm remote.
Sir.
There you go. Yeah, definitely. Maybe we'll bump into each other at one of these events.
Oh, of course.
We've started doing like a hackathon that we will set up, and just sort of a vulnerable school district based off stuff that we have found in our perusing of the space, and give the IT guys the opportunity to take a step onto the other side of the wire and look at a district from the other side to kind of get an idea about what these vulnerabilities look like from outside and what they lead to. Just kind of walk them through some of the common exploits, SQL injection, and command injection, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, if you ever want to take advantage of some of our tabletop exercises and give them to them on the back end, like after that, here's some
Sure.
to reinforce. Yeah, there's something.
Awesome. Oh, yeah. That would be great. Yeah, they are always asking for tools, and I try to give them to them, but we have, there's like 5 of us, so it's hard to.
That I understand.
It's hard to get things done in the gen of the activities.
I'm gonna come back to 300 emails. Like, where were you?
I feel you for sure.
Hey.
Well, hey, great meeting you.
Great meeting you. Take it easy.
All righty, be safe going home.
Yes, sir.
Now, how's this for conference value? You get private FERPA instruction.
The goal.
If that's a goal, we need to work on your goal setting. we need to move the bar up if FERPA's on the goals list.
Private instruction.
On this evaluation, if we're done in half the time.
Hey, awesome. Well, FERPA, and we're done. Well, it will be hard to complete on time with all the questions that we'll get from the crowd, but if we can.
We still got time. I mean, it's 20 minutes.
Oh goodness. actually, a couple days ago, I was
Made by you type of.
yeah, I was in Tokyo a couple of days ago. So I'm wide awake all night, and like right now it's like 8 in the morning or 6 in the morning, according to my brain. So yeah, I'm gonna be. You don't want to be in front of me on the way home. I'm gonna be dead asleep driving. I'm gonna be living on energy drinks.
Vacation?
No. I had a meeting with a company in Tokyo, so it was work, unfortunately. I wish I had free days there. It's fantastic.
I'll move up, so it's not like coming.
FERPA!
You've been to Tokyo before?
Yeah, a couple times.
Heard it's beautiful.
Oh my God. Yeah, well worth the trip. Cleanest city I've ever been in my life. I'm pretty sure you could eat off
Yeah?
any surface in that entire city.
Was there any Corona stuff going on?
Oh yeah.
Lockdown?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a lockdown.
For tourists, maybe?
Yeah, like when you get off the plane, they had a separate line. If you're Chinese, like period, Chinese passport holders, there were people with masks taking them into a separate quarantine area. The rest of us were scrambling to find masks because I don't know if you've been to Lowe's lately, but you can't find a mask. So it was an interesting experience. I was really afraid that we were going to get over there and they were like going to put some travel restriction in place or something, and I'd be stuck in Tokyo.
Stuck on a cruise for 2 weeks?
Yeah. Oh God, we saw those poor people in the harbor. I was like, oh, that's terrible.
Yeah, and then we're gonna.
Yeah, then after you've been stuck on the
I don't know,
boat.
how do you put your, I was like, how do you put your life on hold for 4 weeks?
I mean, it's a good question. How do you, yeah.
Like two, like you're talking a month.
You know, my wife was really unhappy with me because she's a ED doc, and so her work was like, don't come back to work until 14 days after your husband gets back. So she had to like be cleared before going back. So she's like, hey, thanks for that. I appreciate that. I'm like, hey, vacation. Oh goodness. What time are we supposed to start?
4:45.
4:45?
There's other sessions going on.
We got out early. That's why.
All right. Well,
So people may show up.
yeah, we'll give them a few more minutes and see if anybody straggles in.
That's true.
How FERPA familiar are you all? FERPA experts?
No.
Likely to go to FERPA jail, somewhere in between?
I'm actually with a company. I'm on the other angle of it.
Oh, okay.
So we're.
Oh, you're going to get a lot of good stuff out of this one then.
I think so, yeah. And I haven't been anywhere as exotic as Tokyo, but I came across the border as well. Canadian.
Hey,
Oh,
me
right
too.
on.
Hey,
Where you
I'm a
from?
Canadian schooler.
No, sorry,
You moved
I'm
here.
actually
Sorry.
Canadian who
Yeah.
lives here now. I'm actually from Pittsburgh.
There you go.
I mean, I live in Pittsburgh. I was born in Montreal, but I grew up there.
There you go. You grew up in New America.
Okay.
We've been making software for the Canadian education market for a little over a decade. But we're just last week we launched a new product that is not going to be so customized at a provincial level. We're going to start selling to American schools,
Oh, cool.
and we want to be everything compliant. Still in learning mode. It's all new. I have a small. We're going to be perfect compliant, but I want to be able to speak to that when I'm talking to
Sure.
educators.
So yeah, you're going to learn a lot of stuff about. Well, I'll try to spend a little bit of time on the sort of vendor side of the equation, because that's one area the poor vendors, like, the Department of Ed focuses a lot on schools because it's the school's data, right?
Sure.
But at some point, it helps to kind of help the folks that are helping the schools. So we'll talk a little bit about, and we're going to go through a lot of terms of service stuff, because that's where a lot of folks get into trouble.
Yeah.
So we'll do a lot of like, which one of these is a better provision, sort of a thing, and talk about some of the good stuff. Our website, however, has model terms of service on it. And so as you're developing your corporate terms of service for the product, take a look at it. That'll help you avoid some of the red flags that might impact your customers. Will be looking at that, and so that might help you kind of avoid some of the sticky situations.
We did hire, I can't remember which firm she works for, but lawyer.
California?
Yeah, I don't know if she's in California, but she says she only does ed tech law. I can probably figure it out what I said.
Gretchen?
Yeah, it wasn't me who
Okay. I mean, there's like a handful of people in the country,
Yeah.
and that, you can
Well,
probably
we thought
count
it
them
was pretty
on both
neat.
hands, that do education law. So, welcome to the party. We have 3 now. It's a quorum. We can proceed.
And I'm the tech director who's trying to make sure that my teachers aren't just.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Well, this isn't going to make you feel better about your teachers and apps, but at least you'll be armed with some information.
I think they all did have to do Common Sense Media. I don't know
Oh,
if
okay.
you've seen it. They have like a 1-hour video tutorial thing. They
If it's-
all were required to do that this
It's
year.
the one thing that makes me nervous. It's like teachers do click wrap agreements and teachers and apps in classrooms. Right? What are they signing our district up for?
Well,
Because
we're a
we've seen
small
some
private
nightmares
school,
of
so
like
it's what it's
teachers signing up for freemium stuff, and then the trial period ends and billing continues, and $30,000 later the district's like, we never signed up for this.
They all watched the video. I will say there was a renewed appreciation, even to the point where
Awesome.
if somebody contacts the school for student information, somehow I am now the data police. So I get this email.
Data cops.
Yes, this email asking if it's
You gotta play that Bad Boys song over the intercom when you're
we
moving.
give so and so all of the student addresses. No,
Probably not.
we
Yeah.
can't. No,
It's much
we can't.
limited directory
But
information policy.
We will post their flyer in this, like it's,
Yeah.
college wants all the seniors, blah, blah, blah. No, but we'll post their flyer in the school for them. But no, we will
No,
not
I mean,
send them.
the beautiful thing about FERPA is that it's so vague, you can make it fit.
Right.
In most
Yes,
cases.
yes.
The vagary is just about kind of translating FERPish to English and then figuring out ways to make it work.
It is vague, yes.
The vagary is both, confounding and also empowering, so in a strange way.
That's the
yeah.
challenge.
Limited directory information policy. It's a beautiful thing.
Yes, exactly. And then there's that gray area for, continuing education,
Yeah.
because I try to point out to them why they can't get that.
Well, the beautiful thing is, a lot of schools get bullied about directory information because they feel like they have to release it if it's directory information. And, directory information is Latin for we do what we want with our data. And if we don't want to give it to you, we don't have to. FERPA permits it, but doesn't require it. So, I try to tell schools, if you don't feel right about releasing the data, just don't release the data. Nothing compels you to do so. Even if it's directory information and it's in your policy, you could say, no. Somebody walks in and says, hey, give me all the information on your kids, not only should you not give it to them, you probably ought to rough them up on the way out the door, but you don't have to give them the data, even if it's,
At least they're
illustrated.
asking questions now, so small steps. Big
That's good.
steps.
That's real good.
At least they're thinking, should I be giving these
All right, just a few more minutes for stragglers, and maybe we'll get an early start on things.
Roughly that is pretty good.
My husband. So I was 10 years in Vancouver.
Oh, cool.
So I went to Waterloo,
Yeah.
University of Waterloo.
Yeah.
Moved out there for 10 years after that.
I didn't know.
No, I'm at Waterloo.
And what's your role?
And,
Technology director. Okay, cool.
You're a
Excellent. We
startup.
get the right folks.
even though well, he's American by birth.
Oh, okay, perfect.
And he's from Sudbury.
Excellent.
But they moved when he was 2. But he had
Well, hopefully you'll find some of this stuff
Yeah.
interesting as we go through it.
Even though we're
All right,
in
well,
the US,
I'll
we're
try.
closer for going.
As I
Yeah.
promised, I'll try to make it interesting. it's
uh,
FERPA, so no guarantees, but
And I mean,
we'll try to make it
you'll appreciate
tolerable at
this
least.
part. We both had, full-time, very good jobs in Vancouver, but with daycare and taxes, we were moved here and I didn't work for a while. So, yeah, we're I'm about 30 minutes north of, we're about 30 minutes.
I'm sure you've seen this thing on GT.
Yeah, I don't think it was crazy like that with me. Yeah, it was not crazy. I mean, we lived out in Port Moody, but heard it varies, like
I
it's
had no
not.
idea how close it was. It's gonna take us almost, just long.
Mine was like, what, 4 hours?
Yeah.
Yeah,
If we weren't going to that, it was probably good.
yeah, I get home, takes about 6 to get to Barry. 10 to Silver.
3 hours to get to our college.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
Right,
Yeah.
Where's your cottage?
It's girlfriend's parents. It's Dorset. It's past Bracebridge.
Okay.
Howdy.
So your discussion's still going on, okay? 'Cause I don't see the screen, I was wondering what was going on.
Yeah.
So Mike,
Yes, ma'am.
okay, hi, I'm Gidget, I'm gonna be the
Hi, Gidget.
volunteer walking around. If anything you need, just.
Oh, we're
pop in
good.
and-
We're good. We have private FERPA service this time, so this is going to be great.
Awesome, okay. Just making sure there was someone in here. All right, let me know.
We are here.
Where are my model terms as well?
If you just type in model terms of service in the search bar. That should be. All right. Go back one.
Tell me over this one.
Oh, you're in the wrong thing. That's the one.
This one?
Not that one there. Type model terms of service there. You're on the old site. Why Ed hasn't taken down the old site, I don't know. But model terms of service. So there's a webinar about it. There's links to it. There's the document that goes along with it. There's a companion document that spawned this slideshow.
Yeah.
So lots of great information there. And there's like, I believe there's an FAQ for vendors.
I
on the
did
list.
see, yeah, I found
Yeah, and there's actually online training modules for FERPA. So you can go in, you could give all your employees the link, they can sign up, they get a certificate of completion at the end of it, and it's basically FERPA 101. So it's applicable to basically anybody in the education space. And there's a heck of a lot of training videos, like short 5-minute YouTubes.
This is the same type of resources exist.
We don't do COP, so it's a different not us, in other words. So probably it's just not going to be administered by our office. FERPA's our thing, yeah.
Okay.
You'll find some IDEA stuff in there as well. Even though that's not us, we do have some area of responsibility there. So you'll find IDEA stuff, but COPPA is not going to be our bailiwick. Yeah, you'll find some intersectional data. Like if you do a search for COPPA, you'll find like the intersection of FERPA and COPPA, like some guidance there, but it's not going to be like a deep dive into COPPA at all.
Okay.
And for, well, I'm sure you've seen the training at some point, but if you,
Yeah, I'm just thinking, that sounds like a nice
it's
little.
free to use.
Next year's
The
annual.
entire, I mean, I
review.
think we have something like 5 states, the entire, like the SEA and most of the LEAs are enrolled, and they do an annual blitz, usually at the beginning of the year. Means I don't sleep for about 3 months, and everybody gets their certificates, and I get
Yeah.
constant
Well,
constant
you can't
warnings
have
about
them
server
do the
loads.
same thing, you know they're not gonna do it again to refresh their memory, so you need something different.
Well, in this case, we've got tons of stuff available, and I can actually show you some of the stuff if we get through it in enough time and you don't want to kill me by the end of the presentation. So, let's see, where are we? I think, just when I say I don't think anyone else is coming in, we get another one. Excellent. Welcome. We're getting all jazzed up for some FERPA talk. It's crazy. It's like someone opened the floodgates.
I think the other sessions ended at 3:30. By 4:30, I was next door, so we were
Okay.
early.
Welcome, gents.
Thank you. All right.
Howdy, howdy. About to get our FERPA on. Try to contain yourselves.
Mike, do you know anything about tech law in Canada and British Columbia? Have you ever come across it?
I have not, unfortunately. I couldn't speak intelligently about it.
I've heard that British Columbia is pretty strict comparative to what's happening in America, but just curious.
So, from I don't know how much you're aware in terms of FERPA, the general consent requirement and all of the exceptions that come along with it.
Well, that's one thing I might have asked about. We know what that, but then there's also somewhere where the school or the district can sign on behalf of the child. No.
In terms of COPPA, yes.
Is that COPPA?
Yes, but there are certain, and you will find guidance on that on our website, and that kind of lays out the in the educational context. So in other words, they can do it within certain parameters that have to do with it's part of the curriculum, and then with certain guidelines. So they've got some bumpers in place. And you'll find if you just do a search for COPPA, you'll find that document in there, and it'll kind of outline some of the FERPA COPPA interplay with regard to that. But yeah, I mean, from a FERPA perspective, as a vendor, it's almost always going to be school officials. So it's I think they call it the FERPA exception summary. Lists the major FERPA exceptions, the legal language from the actual law, and then underneath breakdown in plain English of this is what that means and these are the requirements, which kind of help vendors sort of know what their customers are, their pain points are in terms of addressing those when they. Because a lot of times the customers don't know how to write, how to ask for the things that they need.
Yeah. Well, if we get it right, we would love to have a document for the teacher, the principal, the tech director, and the parents that show in layman terms how we're FERPA COPPA and everything.
Yep. Unfortunately, and we'll talk about it, the FERPA seal of approval, at least from the department perspective, doesn't exist because of how context sensitive FERPA is.
Well,
but there's tons of like third parties that have. Yeah, there's a bunch of them that do this sort of stuff.
Are they legitimate?
They are, but whether they shouldn't be construed as more than what they are, which is a third party interpreting FERPA and coming up with a set of guidelines that people sign.
Right? So pretty full claims are coming out.
So the benefit for the vendor is that it shows that they have some skin in the game, right?
Sure.
So if you sign on to the student privacy pledge, for example, and then it's proven that you're not adhering to it, that's not a FERPA thing, because there's no cause of action under FERPA. You're never going to get sued under FERPA. But if you're signing on to the pledge and then not doing what you say you're doing, then that kind of, there's FTC implications, and so there's potentials there. So it's kind of demonstrating that sort of, look, we're voluntarily taking this step, but it should, a lot of times it's sold as a FERPA seal of approval, like the department has some kind of, and the department does not view it as a get out of jail free card. Although FERPA jail is not bad. I live there. It's great. 3 squares and a cot. It's beautiful. Tiny room. All of us in it. Tight knit community. All right. Look at this. We got a whole gaggle of people. Excellent. All right. 1 or 2 more minutes. FERPA experts? Yes? No? Maybe so? Maybe so? Awesome. I like your confidence.
After?
Excellent. Awesome.
Thanks. It's lovely down here. Yeah. Yeah, we won't even talk about the voting driver.
Yeah.
Oh my God, isn't that amazing?
That's great.
I don't think the Toronto Maple Leafs think that it's amazing.
I just want to say that word. I just.
He's the practice. Yes, I know. Yes, he's the practice holder.
But he's just like, oh my God, I was like in a real game.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he's Toronto. Yeah, he's Toronto's practice.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Wow. Wait, if he's playing the game, then the Zamboni is free.
Who's the backup?
Be the slowest police chase in history. If you see me on TV, that's what I'm doing. All right, let's get this FERPA party started, y'all. Good afternoon. Thanks for hanging in there with me. I know we're at that part of the day where everyone's kind of unconscious, so I will try to keep it lighthearted. We are talking about a 40-something-year-old privacy law, so I'll have to take that with a grain of salt. This talk is going to be about FERPA and educational apps and services. So we're going to talk about how the FERPA privacy law affects those of us who are using apps and services in our schools. Kind of tongue-in-cheek, you just downloaded a FERPA violation. Unfortunately, that's only kind of half joking because this happens a lot, and we're going to talk about how that happens and why, and hopefully give you some armor against this sort of thing so you don't join me in FERPA jail. No, just kidding. FERPA jail doesn't exist. We call it the Department of Ed building, and I live there. So we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of things. We're going to talk about these as basically musts and shoulds. Right? So we're going to talk a little bit about the changing landscape in education tech in schools. Right? Things are accelerating quickly. We're using more apps. We're using these cloud-based services. We're changing the paradigms in which all of our student data is exchanging hands and being managed by third parties. How does a law written in 1974 have implications in this huge decentralized data world, right? We're going to talk a little bit about legal protection for students' information when it's used in these online services. We're going to talk about FERPA, PPRA, protecting student information in these services. That side over there is going to be the musts, and then we're going to discuss in the tail end a little of the best practices, right? We're going to talk about things that you can do to actionalize some of these things that you have to do, right? We're going to talk about these. I'm going to try to not be speaking in FERPish. So if I start to wander off into like that legalese language where it's all, you know, fuzzy and whatnot, feel free to throw something. Let's a couple of quick definitions. What do we mean when we talk about online education service? It's computer software, right? Mobile applications, web-based tools, things provided by a third party. So, you know, your Google Apps for Education, your online services, maybe your, you know, whatever cloud provider you're using, your software as a service stuff. It could be anything accessed by the internet by by students as part of their education, or by parents also. So think parent portals and your third-party vendors that are providing student data and hosting that and providing that to parents and educators. And are used as part of a school activity, right? So we're talking about things that are involved in the education life of the child. So many challenge. Online services, many of the things we're going to talk about, especially in the mobile app world, don't use traditional written contracts, right? The two-party contract thing is kind of old news when we talk about the world of mobile apps. And that complicates things, right? How do you keep track of that at the district level? How do you manage when your teachers are just electing to use apps in your classroom, right? Does that expose you to any risk? The answer to that is yes. We're going to talk about the ways here in just a few minutes. There is a lot of concern about the commercialization of personal information. That is exactly what FERPA was put in place to do, is to control how student information is disclosed and for what purposes. Right? So at a very general level, FERPA protects the privacy of student information, requires that you have consent of the parent or the eligible student if we're talking post-sec. I don't think we have anybody in the post-sec realm here. No? So we're always going to be talking about parents unless the student's over 18. Right? So we're talking about getting consent before releasing that information. Now you do it inside all day long, right? Teachers talk to teachers about kids, they're exchanging information, they're talking about personally identifiable information. Even that happens under one of the exceptions to FERPA, right? That's one of the exceptions to the consent rule, is that teachers need to exchange information. The administration needs to keep track of this information and exchange this information, like when a student transfers, or all of the various cases where that data has to change hands. Even that happens under an exception to FERPA. We're going to talk about the major exceptions to FERPA as well, and how they apply to some of these new technologies. And how educations protect student privacy in this new world, this always connected classroom thing, we're going to introduce you to a couple of resources that we have. We talked a little bit prior to the talk here about some of the resources that we have, model terms of service. We've got a great technical assistance document called Protecting Student Privacy While Using Online Educational Apps and Services. Internally, we just call it Voldemort because it's like the longest title we've ever created. That if you ever want a government title, there's one. But to kind of prove the point, privacy is a big deal in ed, right? Here's a map, something we borrowed from FPF. 41 states, 126 laws, all basing, all around student privacy, right? This is a huge thing. States are concerned about it. They're passing laws about it. So you should be aware of some of these, and the various ones. The ones in the light blue legislate vendors, SEAs, and LEAs, right? So if you're in one of those states, you might look them up because they apply to you. The most common line you'll hear from education vendors: our software is FERPA compliant. We're school officials. Two things. First, FERPA compliant doesn't exist. Secondly, vendors do not get to decide their school officials. Schools determine who are school officials. That's an actual thing that they bestow upon the people that act for or on behalf of the institution. So, things that don't exist: unicorns, dragons, the FERPA seal of approval. It just doesn't happen, right? There is no seal. You can't have it. It doesn't exist. There are third parties, as I mentioned before, that have some student privacy pledge. They have some other kind of like seals that you can sign on to. Those should not be construed as being official U.S. Department of Education FERPA compliant seals. They are not. They mean that they adhere to a certain set of rules and that they've willingly signed on to those, but it does not mean that the U.S. Department of Education has reviewed these products or that we've endorsed any of them, because we're just not in that business, and it is impossible under FERPA. If the more you know about FERPA, the more you realize that FERPA compliant is a target which you will almost never find anybody saying they're FERPA compliant, because it's so context sensitive. It all depends on a billion things. So one thing you will hear me say on almost any of your questions about FERPA is it depends. If you ask me, is this okay with FERPA? The answer is probably it depends. And then I will follow on with a bunch of questions that help clarify whether FERPA is being transgressed in that situation. So one of the questions that is very applicable is, how do these vendors, how do these partners, the school officials, these app providers, these third-party providers get your student data? Under FERPA, there's only a couple of ways that this can happen. They either do it with consent. In other words, they get consent of the parents to release this data to the vendor. That's great. You have consent. Under FERPA, you can do whatever you want with the data. You can release it, they can reuse it, they can market with it, they can do whatever they want with it. Provided that you have written consent under FERPA. And that is an actual thing. So you have to have written consent that states what data will be shared and for what purposes and to whom the party or class of parties to which the data will be released. And it has to be signed and dated, or electronically signed and dated in certain cases, by either the parent or the eligible student. So consent isn't as easy as it would initially appear, but it is probably the cleanest way to get data, depending on what type of data it is, into the hands of a third party that needs to use it for something. The other way to do that is under one of the exceptions to FERPA, and there are a bunch of them, something like 16 of them, if my memory doesn't fail me. Typically, only 2 of them really matter from this perspective, and that's directory information. Everybody familiar with what directory information is? All right, so the big things with directory information, you gotta have a directory information policy that identifies the data elements that you consider to be directory information. And you have to track the opt-outs, because directory information The directory information exceptions provide for the parents to opt out of their children's data being shared. So if the vendor is providing a service in which all of your kids need to be in, directory information is probably not a safe bet because you won't have the information, or you shouldn't have the information, of any of the kids whose parents have opted out, right? You have to track that. The other and most common way that this happens is under the directory, or under the school official exception, which allows for one teacher to talk to another teacher, teacher to administration, school to school, etc. That is, people that are acting for or on behalf of the school and have a legitimate educational interest in the child, right? So those are the big ones around school official exception. That is how most school services are outsourced from school officials. Let's talk a little bit. We talked very quickly about the directory information policy. For those of you who are not sure what that actually means, it's information that is personally identifiable. So it is PII. It is not it's some different class of info. It is personally identifiable information that would not be generally considered to be an invasion of privacy if it was released. So name, address, maybe a picture, email, something like that. It would never include things like social security number or any kind of like ethnic data or disability data or anything like that. That could never be directory information, right? We do have a list, and this is kind of funny, on our website we have directory information guidance, and in there we say, the list, directory information may include yada, 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 and there's like, 14 things or something on the list. And you would not believe how many schools, directory information policy is like cut and paste from that finite list of data elements. It doesn't have to be those. Those are just examples. It's not limited to. It can be other things. But it's to give you an idea that it's general directory information, not anything specific or very harmful. So keep that in mind. It is up to each organization. The department isn't going to substitute their judgment for yours, provided you're not handing out social security numbers. As long as you have correctly identified that information in your policy and you send your annual FERPA notice to let people know what the policy is, make it available on your website, that is an organizational decision. You are free to do with as you please. As we were talking about, a lot of schools sometimes feel pressured, right? You have directory information, you're going to give it out. Somebody comes and says, I want all of your students' information, and you're not comfortable with that. As a school, you can use what's called a limited directory information policy. FERPA is permissive, right? Your policy would allow you to give that data out, but it doesn't compel you to give that data out. So don't feel pressured as a school that you're compelled to release data under things like the directory information policy, because you are not compelled to do that. You can specify under what conditions you'll release that information, and if you don't feel comfortable with it, or you feel there's a safety issue, or you feel that there's some other kind of marketing thing or something going on that's illegitimate, you don't have to comply with that request. You can say, no, that's not one of the things that we release directory information for. That limited directory information is pretty important. Let's talk a little bit about school officials. We hit on the big points. Other officials within the school, communicating between teachers, etc. Or this is how we do outsourcing in education. Right? Education institutions can outsource institutional services and functions that include the disclosure of education records to contractors, consultants, volunteers, or other third parties, provided certain conditions are met. Here are the conditions. You have to be performing an institutional service or function that the school would otherwise be using its own employees for. Right? So if you're outsourcing to Google or Microsoft or something like this that's providing you with storage and other networking services and that sort of thing, you would otherwise be providing those services, and so you're outsourcing them under the school officials exception. The data that you provide to these third parties has to be under your direct control. And so what does that mean? That means that you can actually affect that data at will, right? So if you're storing it in some third-party system and a person makes a request to review that data, as is their right under FERPA, you should be able to comply with that within that 40 day or 45 that 45-day limit, right? If you can't meet the statutory requirements because the third party can't access it or can't give you access, you're gonna have a real hard time saying that you had direct control over that data. Data use limitations have to be in place, right? The third party can't turn around and market using that data. They can't sell it, to downstream partners. They can't redisclose that information in any way. There are severe and strict limitations on how that data can be used. And while the school official's exception does not require a written agreement, we strongly recommend that you have one, right? That's your contract. That's where you lay out as an organization what the expectations are, what the data use limitations are, all of those important things that you need to have in place. So, annual notices. We've run into a lot of problems with schools that don't do this. Every educational institution has an annual notification of FERPA rights that go out. Hopefully everybody here, if you're at a school, does send out an annual FERPA notification. It should include criteria for determining who constitutes a school official. This is where you explain who you designate as school officials and for what purposes, and what constitutes a legitimate educational interest, right? Because that's the two components that we have to have in order to release information on the school officials exception. And it may vary, right, depending on your organization, because we're outsourcing for different reasons. Under FERPA, are providers limited in what they can do with the student information they collect or receive? Yes, no? Are third-party providers limited in what they can do with the information they receive? We just talked about this. Yes, absolutely. Yes, they are. However, there are some things to consider. They vary depending on how they receive the data, right? If it's released under the directory information, there are no limitations other than what the institution includes in their agreement with the provider, right? If it's done under a directory information, because you don't have direct control of the data if you release it under directory information. It's basically you're setting the data free. So your written agreement then becomes your guidance, which is why I say written agreements are good. If it's disclosed under school officials, then you have a heck of a lot more control, right? Because it's under your direct control. It is not the vendor's data, it's still your data. Under directory information, it may become the vendor's data, depending on how you've worded your agreements. And of course, all those prohibitions on redistribution and the de-identification and all of this other stuff come into play for school officials. So, I'll walk you through all of them here. Let's talk a little bit about metadata for a second. There's a lot of confusion around metadata, right? What about derivative data? Like, we provide certain information to our providers, and through their process, while the students are using the system, we're generating sort of an ancillary data set, right? And a lot of times that ancillary data can uniquely identify an individual, right? So, all of this data about data is what we're talking about when we're talking about metadata. Metadata can be leveraged by the third-party provider, provided that direct and indirect identifiers are strict, right? What I mean by direct and indirect, so like a name, like first and last name, direct identifier, right? It reasonably will identify an individual. Indirect identifiers might be something like a date of birth, right? Because many people might share a birthday. It's a one-to-many relationship. Some of those things, like direct identifiers, are always PII, right? Indirect may not be, but if you have a bunch of indirect identifiers, every additional data element that you add, indirect, may narrow down the scope of people and become personally identifiable at some point. Even though it's not a direct identifier, it may yield information that becomes identifying. So, properly de-identified metadata may be used by providers for other purposes, provided that these direct and indirect identifiers have been removed, unless prohibited by their agreement with the education institution. So feel free in your contract, as an education, as a school or a SEA, or I guess the SEA wouldn't be doing it under school officials, but as a school, don't be shy about, if you don't want metadata to be shared, put that in your contract. You can do that. However, if it's de-identified data, there's nothing in FERPA that would prevent that from being shared. So, to your point, sir, FERPA is not the only game in town. We're talking about some of these data. PPRA, Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment, may come into effect, especially around things like when we're doing college entrance examinations and things that have surveys attached to them. Surveys can get really sticky, and there's some great information. We're not going to dig into PPRA in this talk because there's way too much FERPA goodness to get to. But there's lots of stuff on our website, studentprivacy.ed.gov. Don't worry, I'll bring it up. That talks specifically around PPRA and some of the intricacies of PPRA with regard to the whole survey thing in students. COPPA is the other one. Again, that's not an ed thing. That's not something that we're going to dive right into. But COPPA may come into play, especially around what you were talking about earlier, where the school can exercise consent with regard to COPPA, provided certain conditions are met. The principle among those is that this is an activity that's directly associated with the education of the child. I would highly encourage you to check out our guidance specifically on the FERPA and COPPA intersection on the website. It gets into much greater detail in all kinds of lawyerly language. That will explain it a little bit better, but imagine the big bumpers are, this is part of the curriculum, this is part of our educational experience for the child, and so we can exercise, the consent for those purposes only. And of course, state and local laws come into play, right? So FERPA may not be the only dog in the fight. Your state may have a higher thing. Think of the FERPA as the floor, not ceiling. So the states can be, can build up on that foundation. So check and see if there are other laws that may apply to children's information, specifically around the privacy law of that. Remember that map that we showed? Lots of states have them, and sometimes they're just kind of modifications of COPPA that kind of stack on top. So check them out. Now we're getting into the real meat of things, right? So can individual teachers sign up for free education services in your schools? Yes, no, maybe so. They do. Are they authorized, or they just do it? They just do it, right? Kind of worries you, right? Especially those are, IT folks, right? What are they signing us up for? So a better question is, should teachers sign up for these free or freemium services? I think the answer is maybe. It depends on whether or not schools had the opportunity to vet them, right? Because some of these services may bring along a little extra, right? What happens at the end of the freemium period? If the teacher doesn't, take action to stop the contract, is a $10,000 bill going to show up at the school at the end of the school year? So yes, this is a tricky wicket. Here are some issues as well. Teachers find these cool apps they want to use in the classroom. A lot of these apps are kind of misleading, right? Here's a couple of icons on the bottom. Which one is YouTube? One of these is a Chinese knockoff that's probably filled with malware and recording all of your data and sending it back home to China. The other one is YouTube. What if you picked the wrong one? What if the student is loading it to their device and they picked the wrong one, right? Where's all that student data going? Well, maybe going right into the clutches of a malicious actor, or someone who's going to market to the kids in an inappropriate way, or track them across the internet, right? So FERPA's requirements for the education institutions disclosing PII under school officials, remember that's how we're doing this, direct control, annual notice provisions, authorized use, and limits on redisclosure. If your teachers are doing this without your knowledge, are you meeting those criteria? Probably not, unless your teachers are super diligent. Most likely, you don't even know that your data is leaving, let alone have direct control over it, right? So it's a best practice to set up a policy, right? Your teachers should know what the school's policies are regarding the use of apps in the classroom, and you should determine what's the process for having an app vetted by the school and officially approved for use by teachers. I'm not saying don't use apps, right? There's a lot of great apps out there that have huge education value, but you should, as an organization, understand what risks, if any, change as a result of the use of that app, and what your vulnerabilities are going to be, and be able to account for where all your data is going, right? Pop quiz. If you use directory information to set up an app for your students, does this guarantee all the students will be automatically included? No, I see some shaking heads. No? Ah, absolutely, yes. This is why it's not a great provision for doing this if all the students have to be in it, because the opt-outs aren't going to be there, right? So, should you be concerned if an online service or app uses a click wrap terms of service or terms of service agreement instead of a traditional contract? Instead of having a written contract where you can see all the provisions, you get 5-pitch font, next, finish, right? Yes, maybe doesn't mean you shouldn't use it, but it means you should apply a little vigilance, right? It depends. Here's that magic FERPA answer. Click wraps or terms of service agreements are not prohibited under FERPA. You could certainly use them, right? Nothing in FERPA says you can't hit next, accept, and use it in your classroom. There are some considerations, right? Because Batman will stop you. These agreements are referred to, they can operate as a provider's legally binding contract, right? So a teacher accepts the terms to some app that is free to start, but after the first month starts charging you, right? They get done with it, they don't go in and cancel the service, and sometime down the road you get a massive bill from a third-party app provider saying, hey, you signed up for this service, here's our record of you clicking accept on the terms of service. This teacher exercised authority on behalf of the school district and put you on the hook for this $50,000 bill or whatever it is. Right? That actually happens. So keep in mind that next accept is equivalent to you signing your name or somebody on behalf of the district signing their name on a contract accepting those terms. Oh, also, once your institution clicks the I agree, those terms are in force, which means that any information that you give them, they're going to handle according to those terms of service. Right? You've said that it's okay that they violate FERPA if their process violates FERPA. Remember, it's your data, right? So if you choose to disclose it in a way that violates FERPA, that's a big problem for you. So that's why I say, yes, you can absolutely use these things, but you should use them in a measured way and understand and have a process by which to evaluate the terms of service to make sure that it complies with FERPA's requirements. They could potentially lead to this. Of course, we just talked about that. Pupil Rights Amendment comes into play when we're talking about like the surveys and other things that may come along with like online student assessments, or like we're talking about math quiz apps and things like this where they're asking questions about the students. The onus is on the institution to review the terms of service. That not only from a FERPA perspective, but also from a state law perspective. And remember that in many cases, especially with online apps, those terms of service are built from the protection of the entity that's providing the app, not necessarily for your benefit. So read them. They may not understand FERPA, right? A lot of these apps are, a couple of folks in a garage somewhere in startup mode. They may not understand all of the intricacies of FERPA, but you're the party that's responsible. So if they do something stupid with your data, you're the FERPA cops are rappelling into your auditorium, not the app provider. So let's talk about terms of service provisions. We're going to go through a bunch of examples here, and you get to read them and pick which one you think is better. So the example the provisions are intended to give you kind of a general idea about terms of service agreements. Specific language will vary. Your mileage may vary. Offer, void where prohibited, et cetera, et cetera. The language matters is what this exercise is all about. So with that, let me introduce you to the Challenge Reading app for the Connected Classroom, the CR app, the CRAP app, as I like to call it. It's found on the App Store, and it's got some great stock photos, so it has to be FERPA compliant, right? Let's check out their terms of service. Oh, they must be made by Apple. They're 5-pitch font, and no one can understand it. So no one's going to read all that. It's 20,000 pages long. A teacher needs to get the students working on something, so they're going to be scrolling down and clicking, yes, I agree, right? Well, let's take a look at some of these provisions. So when we're looking at these, the first one Can we read that, or the crap app here considers data collected by the application to be all personally identifiable information, PII, and other non-public information. Data include but are not limited to student data and user content. Or the challenge reading application, the crap app, considers data collected by the application to include only that information provided by the user in the course of using a service. Right or left? Which one of these is better?
The right?
The right? Who says right? Your face doesn't say confidence on that.
The left is more specific.
So, okay, so who says left? Now everybody's going to say left, right? Yes, yes, it is. The left is the better provision for exactly that reason, right? When they're talking about what data is covered by the terms of service, the broader the better, right? It's not just the user's information that they give. That includes things like the metadata and that other information that's generated that may also be PII, right? That's why that's a stronger provision. Here's another one. These crap app guys are tricky. So crap is not responsible for any data collected by third-party services, including on the crap platform. Or crap will collect only that data necessary to fill the purposes supplied in this agreement. Who says left? Who says right? All right, a couple hands going up. And I gotta reduce the delay on this arrow. You're absolutely right, congratulations. See, a bunch of experts in here, look at this. So, the crap app will collect only the data necessary to fulfill the purposes specified in the agreement. Why is that better?
The one on the left is saying,
Yeah, it's a get out of jail free card. We're not responsible for any of this stuff, right? So this is very narrow in scope, right? We cover the most data and we're the most narrow with how we use that data, right? We are only going to abide by what this written agreement says. That's why that's a strong statement. The other one is, we can do whatever we want, we're not responsible for it. Any third party, our partners, whoever, can do whatever they want with the data. It's not our problem. So it's much better, the other one. So, common thread about the ones that we just saw. We define data broadly, right? It covers a lot of space. Second one, we limited that scope, right? The scope of collections is very limited in what they can actually use, right? And how they use it. And we have strong, simple definitions, right? They're not terribly complex or complicated. Let's have some more. CRAP may use de-identified data for product development, research, or other purposes. De-identified data will have all indirect personal identifiers removed, includes but is not limited to name, ID numbers, date of birth, and location. Or, CRAP may use de-identified data for product development, research, or other purposes. Data will have all names and ID numbers removed. Which of these is the better one? Who says left? Couple hands, couple nods, all right. Who says right? Nobody? I think consensus is left on this one. Let's see where the arrow falls. Ding. Hey, look at that. You guys are right on the money. Yes. Why is this a much better statement? Very specific, right? Limit includes but not limited to. So anything that's personally identifiable, they're going to be identified, right? Here, names and ID numbers. Is that the only personally identifiable data they're likely to have? Oh, they're going to be generating metadata like crazy. They probably have tons of other data sets. Much of that data will be uniquely identifiable, right? Indirect identifiers in groups that may identify an individual. So, significant amount of data provided education services. Metadata on students' interaction with the service or app is often collected and analyzed to help improve the product. This enables the app to be more effective and better services, etc. But even stripped of these crazy, direct identifiers, there's still a lot of data in there. So when we're going through looking at these terms of service, those are the kind of traps that you want to look for, the red flags, right? If they're only doing names and ID numbers, it's probably not sufficient. Here's another couple. One, I promise we'll get through these. I know it's a lot of reading. By using CRAP, you grant CR app a non-exclusive, fully paid, royalty-free, worldwide, sub-licensable, transferable, limited license to use, modify, delete, add to, reproduce in any media format through any media channels for any purpose, any data or work submitted to the app during the course of use. But wait, there's more. So, or you agree to grant the provider of CR app a limited, non-exclusive license solely for the purpose of performing its obligations as outlined in this agreement. This agreement does not give the provider any rights implied or otherwise to data, content, or intellectual property except as expressly stated in this agreement. Who says left? Awesome. Who says right? You guys can't fool you. Yeah, absolutely correct. Right? It's the right. And for the exact purposes that I'm sure you all believe, this one is very narrow in how it can be used, right? We are limited to what we made in this agreement, period, end of story. The other one is, a bunch of buzzwords that mean we can do whatever we want, whenever we want with your data. It belongs to us. You do not have direct control. So, ownership of student data is the important key here. That left-hand provision basically gave themselves ownership of the data. You can't do that, not under school officials, right? Or directory information or something like that, be a different story. But this is school officials, so you can't do that. So access. Let's talk about access for a bit. FERPA requires education institution to make education records accessible to students, right? Under FERPA, students and parents have a right to review and access their student records. It's within 45 days from their request, and a couple of things go along with that. To fulfill FERPA requirements, providers have to make that data available, hence the direct control requirement. As a best practice, data should be passed to the provider, to the institution. So in other words, if a parent wants access to their student records, the school should probably not say, go talk to the vendor, right? The data should flow through you. Remember, it's not the vendor's data. The vendor doesn't have a contract with the parent. You are the ones that have the contract with the parent, so the parent should get the information through you. Here's another one. The CRAP will use data only for the purpose of fulfilling its duties and providing services under this agreement and for improving services under this agreement. Or, CRAP uses data to operate its website and deliver services. CRAP may also use or transfer data to third parties to inform you of products and services available from CR app and its affiliates. Who says left? Bunch. Okay, nods. Who says right? Anyone? Any takers on the right? No? Can't fool you guys. It's a sharp crowd. You're absolutely right. Left is better. Why? We're not selling your data to third parties, right? It's very limited in how it can be used. Only for the improvement of the services under this agreement and only under these conditions. So data use by providers should be limited to the purpose outlined in the agreement for the education institution, right? Under school official, that's why we recommend you should have a written agreement in place with your third-party providers. It's kind of the data Bible, right? How they use that data it's important that you have that shared understanding. Always be on the lookout for provisions that contain the phrase without providing notice to users, right? That's a real common thing that folks put in. It's not always nefarious. It's not, they're going to change it on us without telling us just to throw a wrench in the works. No, they do that because they don't necessarily want to go through all of the rigmarole of notifying everybody and their dog about changes to privacy provisions. They should go through that. So you want to be on the safe side. So looking for these without providing notice to users should be a red flag. Doesn't mean you can't use the service, but just be aware that you're going to have to come back and check the privacy policy pretty often, the terms of service pretty often, because they may change them and not tell you. And remember, if the data is being disclosed under school officials, look for that legitimate educational interest, right? That has to be there in order for this to be a legitimate sharing of data under school officials. So information gathered on online educational service or mobile app could be used to create a profile on a student. I guess that kind of, we're all IT folks or technology folks here, so that goes without saying. The profile could be used to direct advertising or marketing materials to students. This is a huge thing, especially when we're talking about free services, right? Free is never free. There's a cost, right? If you're not paying for it, it's probably because you're the product, right? So that information is valuable to these to providers. The language in the terms of service should be clearer on how that data is collected, and it cannot be used to advertise or market to students, right? That comes as a surprise sometimes to folks that offer free apps or services, right? Because that's how they make their money, right? It's free because they get to sell that data on the back end. That's very important to understand. Target marketing or advertising could violate privacy laws, and not just FERPA. It could also be your state laws. So understanding those is also a kind of a key thing. So let's talk about it. You agree not to hold CRAP responsible for any unauthorized data breaches. Or CRAP stores and processes data in accordance with industry best practices. A summary of our security controls is described here. Nobody chooses the left, right? Good. Yes, you're all absolutely correct. Run away if you ever see that, because that is literally a get out of jail free card. It's great that they've posted a link to their privacy policy or their security policy right here. That is awesome. Transparency is like the best thing ever because it gives you peace of mind to let you know this is how our vendor is protecting our data, right? When you talk about how do I show that I'm FERPA compliant, right here, right? You're explaining how does our app protect data? Why do we value your data? These are the steps that we take to protect your data. It doesn't have to get into the technical weeds like too far or exposing trade secrets or anything like that. But it should, at a high level, provide them with some assurance, right? It's about making them feel like they have some assurance that security is important and that those provisions that we've talked about are in place. Student data needs to be protected. Providers' terms of service should include provisions outlining strong policies for safeguarding these data. Failure to provide adequate security could lead to a FERPA violation. That's a pretty common sense statement, but in FERPA they say reasonable methods a lot. You've got to use reasonable methods to protect student data from disclosure without consent. That's where that reasonable methods comes into play, right? Is what we're doing to protect data reasonable? Is it in line with other community best practices around this type of data? So, mother, you'll be so tired of terms of service. CRAP may modify the terms of this agreement at any time. Notice that these changes will be available on our website. Please visit the website periodically to become aware of these changes. Or CRAP will provide notice and obtain consent from the school prior to any change in the way data is collected, used, shared under this terms of agreement. This is an easy one, right? Who says right? Bunch of hands. All right, everybody agrees. Can't fool you guys. You're experts. You're ready for the 201 version of this course. Absolutely, yes, because they didn't put the onus on the school to come back, and they change it at will, and the school has to come back every day to make sure that the privacy policy hasn't changed, right? They will maintain the status quo until they need to change, and then they will approach you and ask. That's a much better provision. So, this is the point you're probably saying, forget it, we're going back to pen and paper, that is it. But you do not have to worry. Don't panic. Technology is a good thing. Apps provide lots of valuable services. These third-party providers, huge economy of scale in some of these cloud service offerings. There's a lot of benefits to be had. Yes, it does affect your risk. You have to just be aware of that. But it's our responsibility to make sure that if we use the tools, they're used properly. We've outlined some of that stuff. The first is to develop a policy on the use of apps in the classroom, right? I keep pounding them, beating that dead horse, right? Create that use of apps in the classroom policy, right? Teachers can then refer to it, and you won't have that $30,000 bill show up in the mail, right? Ostensibly, they'll follow that policy. But the teachers always, what about academic freedom? What happens when that professor finds the greatest app ever and must use it in the classroom? Is that okay? Well, maybe. If you have a policy that says, here's how we go through the process of getting that app approved, and the professor says, sure, it's this app, here's all the information, it goes through the process, your school reviews the terms of service, accepts it, says, sure, yeah, we can use that, we'll put it on a list that says, this app has been approved for use in the school. We understand the risks, we accept them. If you have that, sure, it's the greatest app ever, use it. So, approving educational apps or services, test and evaluate those services. See if they're right for your institution. Some states do this at like the regional or the state level. Like in Colorado is a good example of this. Like they have this like statewide Department of Education list of apps that they've vetted, and they've had a process of which they vet, and they've got like a traffic light, right? Green, red, yellow, that shows all the kind of the risk score for each of these apps that have been approved, right? Great resource to reuse at your school. Hey, you know, as we do this, refer to this list. Anything on this list, teachers, you can use, right? Reuse the stuff that people have already done. I think Massachusetts and a couple of other states have gotten on board with that sort of an approach as well. New York, I think, may do that in some areas as well. So, you know, reuse this stuff. You know, don't have to recreate the wheel or spend all that time vetting if someone you trust has already done the vetting for you. Training, yes, absolutely, train your teachers. You know, no teacher will voluntarily sign up for that responsibility when they really understand what happens when they click next. Yes, right? They don't want that responsibility. They don't want to put their kids' data at risk. Once they understand it, they'll jump on board. So, here's a couple of other great resources. Student Data Privacy Consortium has vetted applications database you can search. It's great if your teachers, if they want to use an app that's on that list, well, it's already been vetted. If you agree with the vetting process, go with that. Also, California Education Technology Professionals Association, searchable database of vetted apps and vetted terms of service. I think they actually changed their name at the last meeting, so they may be under a different name, but I'm sure if you search that, you'll find the new name. Keep in mind that none of these are officially approved. Remember that FERPA seal of approval doesn't exist, but it's a risk game, right? Do you have the time to vet all these apps, or if you understand the process, can you accept that risk and say, hey, look, these apps have been vetted, other schools are using. Best practices for protecting student privacy. Maintain awareness of other relevant laws, right? Don't get too focused. I know FERPA is a beautiful thing, and you want to spend all day there in FERPA, but remember that state laws apply, PPRA, COPPA, other things may have some implication of the data that you're using, so understand that other things may also apply. Be aware of which services are used in your organization. Everybody has some shadow IT to some point, but let's hope that it's not apps that your teachers are using with lots of student data flowing into them, right? To the degree possible, be aware of all those services that you have been signed up for, as educational apps. Have policies and procedures to evaluate and approve those things. Use written contracts or legal agreements. If you don't do it, you're asking for trouble. That is how you enforce provisions with this school officials. I know it's not required under FERPA, but please, please, please consider doing that, because that is your leg to stand on with regard to protecting your data. Because remember, it is still your data under school officials. Being transparent with students and parents is hugely important, right? On your website, talk about who your school officials are, how you select school officials, and what the purpose of having school officials are. Maybe list some of them, maybe not all of them. Say, hey, list the examples of our school officials include, but are not limited to the following. All right, that kind of gives the parents some expectations of what's going on and why student data is being shared with some of these folks. And know when consent may be the appropriate route, right? So there may be some apps that would be really great if we could use, but we just can't do them under school officials. It may be better to go ahead and just get consent and accept the possibility that some students may not be able to use that app. If that's the case, it's okay. Consent is still a viable route. So I thank you for bearing with me. I know it's been kind of a whirlwind tour through all of these various crap app terms of service. You all did fantastically well, I have to say. Very well done. Best audience ever. And I'll definitely take any questions if you have specific questions around portions of our talk today.
You mentioned law policies.
Yes.
Do you have those online on the site?
Yes, ma'am. Studentprivacy.ed.gov. Here is our website, except somebody forgot to put the S on the HTTP. It'll still work, but it'll just redirect you. And our email as well. If you search model terms of service on our website, you'll get a whole list of things, including the actual model terms of service, that you can take your prospective terms of service and kind of look for the list of red flags, right?
We're talking about a policy for like for your teachers in terms of vetting selecting apps and some of those types of things for a district. That you guys have a model policy.
I don't know that we have a model policy for that because, I mean,
Maybe not. I know they accept vetted
They have
already.
vetted apps, but they don't necessarily have here's the vetted process, we send it to the school district, go through, here's the
see, the problem with that is as soon as we do that, one school that has a malware reverse engineer on staff is going to go, oh, we really need to get down at the binary level, and somebody else will go, we don't have the staff or the time to do that. So.
Absolutely, and that's exactly, we face the exact same problem, so that's why I was hoping, like, if you had some, like, okay, here's the really essential things that we would suggest that you do. I mean, I've seen rubrics from a number of organizations that put them together.
I don't think we have it on.
Essential rubric, maybe.
We don't have it on paper. It's definitely something I'll take back. This is not the first time we've heard that request.
Sure.
I know that they're kind of reticent to do it for some of the reasons that we specified.
Right.
But I mean, the kind of spectrum of policy goes from terms of service review, and so we look at the terms of service, we talk to the vendor, we sit down and talk about data security and requirements under FERPA, and that's our vetting process, to full on basically, application pen testing and reverse engineering apps to see what kind of data they're using and what, are they encrypting the data in transit and that sort of stuff.
Absolutely. But
So
like,
the-
you're just standing there and you're saying, hey, we recommend that you have an approved policy on for your teachers, and this is nothing against you, but then it'd be nice if you helped us with that, because.
Sure. Well, if
We
you
recommend you do it, but it's really hard, we don't want to hear it, it's sort of messy, because it's really hard for us, and we have to get near it.
well, so I don't want to say we don't want to get near it. I just want to say that without knowing more about your organization, I can't tell you. But we would be more than happy to sit down with you and the folks around you that are crafting the policy.
Right.
To if you send us an email,
Yeah.
we can set up a conference call. We can sit down and talk. You can send us your documents. We can review them and say, hey, have you considered this? We can make review of your policy part of the services that we provide, and we can then talk about the reasoning why and stuff like that, and have a tailored experience rather than me spitting out here's a one-size-fits-all solution, because every organization is different, has different resources available. So that's what I would recommend. We would be more than happy to do that. Yes, ma'am.
How does FERPA cover extracurriculars? Both those sponsored by the school, like a robotics club, or if somebody is meeting on school grounds but is not sponsored by the school, like PTA, what was it?
So if it's something that's being done on behalf of the school, then the school might be able to use school officials or something of that nature. Sometimes that's easily covered under things like directory information, because usually those programs are opt-in or anyway. So getting consent may also be an option for people who want to use or leverage those services. Where we get into trouble is when, community service organizations or something want lists of students so they can go contact them to see if they're interested in a program. And they'll be like, give us a list of all of your developmentally challenged students that meet these criteria so that we can offer our services to them. No. But you can give us a list of your services and we can provide that information to all of the people who meet those criteria and see if they're interested, and then they can consent to the release of their information. So under FERPA, there's a bunch of ways to make it work. You can almost twist FERPA into whatever contortions you want. You just have to understand what your desired end state is and make sure that you check the boxes on the way there. Right? So it depends on the situation, but there's multiple routes to get that information to the people who are providing services, especially if the school wants those things to happen. Hopefully that's somewhat clear. Yes, ma'am.
So you obviously want to be FERPA compliant. What does a FERPA violation look like when?
So a FERPA violation occurs anytime personally identifiable information about a student is disclosed to someone who is not the student or parent or someone.
So the parent would, I guess I'm just trying to figure out how do you
So a lot of
know
times,
that how to violate, does
well, a lot of
parent
times,
complain?
a lot of times it's, quote, those parents, because everybody has those
Right,
parents.
right.
A lot of times it's a result of that. They're unhappy with the school, or they think they've been wronged in some way. They demand access. The access that you can provide is not sufficient for what they believe, and so they make a complaint. 9 times out of 10, the school isn't doing anything wrong, or the school misunderstands what they have to do under FERPA, or the parent misunderstands what their rights under FERPA are. Like, we demand a copy of all of our students' records. Well, FERPA doesn't provide for copies of the records; it provides for access to the records. So a lot of time, 9 times out of 10, it's a misunderstanding or of some kind. Occasionally, it's things like data breaches, and parents hear about it in the news, didn't hear anything from the school. Oh my God, my kid's rights have been violated. And then we'll get a phone call. The Student Privacy Office is also the office that administers FERPA. So all the enforcement actions under FERPA happen on the other side. PTAC is the contractor side of the house, and SPPO, the Student Privacy Office, is the Fed side of the house. They handle all of the administrative stuff for FERPA. Parents will call and make the official complaint through a process, and you can see the whole process on our website.
So
Under
the
FERPA
process
files.
typically originates from the parent who's not happy.
Yeah, 9 times out of 10. Once in a while, and typically again in association with a data breach, a school will realize that there's been a FERPA violation, and they'll proactively call to say, hey, we've experienced this issue. What do we do now? And we highly recommend that route of the school calling us before the parents get wind of it, because then we can help when the parent does call to complain and sort of say, yes, we're aware, we've been working with the school, they're proactively getting this fixed, they reached out right away, here's what the school is doing, we're going to be working with them closely and kind of reassure them. Now, at the end of the day, no one's getting sued under FERPA. There's no cause of action under FERPA, so nothing's going to happen from a lawsuit perspective, at least under FERPA. But a lot of times, just a little bit of extra information when they call can kind of head off that, and that's always a benefit for the school. Any other questions? You guys have been the greatest audience ever. Thank you so much for hanging in there with me, and have a wonderful rest of your conference. Was this helpful for folks?
Are these slides available somewhere?
I believe yes. In fact, I think they recorded the whole thing, so they may be available on the site at some point.
Okay.
If not, just shoot me an email and I'd be happy to send them to you.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the vendor doesn't get to sit. The school is the one who designates. So the school appoints people as school officials. They have to, in order for the vendor to receive data. Unless they're doing it under one of the other exceptions, which is why, when vendors come in, the first thing that goes through, they'd say, oh, don't worry, we've been designated a school official. And the schools don't. No. Yes, the school says, we want to use you as a vendor, so we're going to contract with you and make you a school official, and that will allow us to provide you with student data, but you're acting as us.
That's the school official.
That's the school official
Okay,
exception.
that might answer my other question then. I was gonna say, that sounds like a better one than directory information.
So,
Well,
yeah.
it would be directory information, but I guess in the case that you didn't want to make us the school official.
So, like in some cases, for example, you were going to do something else with the data, right? Something that would not be provided for under school official, right? So if you were going to reuse the data or share it with a partner or something else, under directory information, the school could provide that information, and once it's been transferred over, once it's released under directory information, these data would belong to. They can do whatever they want with it.
If we don't do that, we can always go to the school official route.
Yeah, 9 times out of 10 vendors use a school official, because 9 times out of 10 they're being used as part of the educational curriculum, and the schools want to make sure that every student is in there. If you do it under directory information, you have opt-outs, and so there's 1 or 2 kids in the back of the classroom that aren't using it.
Technically, if they go to the school official route, the kid can't opt out.
No, because it's part of the curriculum, and think of school officials as basically, we're deputizing you as part of our staff. So.
And aside from the annual notice, where does the school say who the school official route?
So that's why we recommend written agreements. It's not required, but we absolutely suggest that as a best practice, not only for them, but also for you, right?
Say they were on record.
this is what you said we needed to do, this is what we're gonna do for you. That way there's no surprises and nobody changes, that it's not a moving target.
Yeah.
It's better for everybody, and then what some schools do is they actually put their contracts online, and they make it just super transparent. So they have a list of, here's our school officials, and here are